so the defense rests.
Yes.
All right, we are down to closing argument, folks. All right, State will take a second to set up, I guess. Yes, that is an official.
Of the jury, it's been some time since the first time that we spoke. I think that was a week and a half ago when we were in Memphis. And while we were in Memphis, during jury selection, I talked to you about the jury charge. I talked to you about the process that we would go through, and that the first part of it was actually the evidence that comes in through the witness stand. But the second part of it is the law. You have heard all of the evidence in this case. That part is complete. But now it is the time for the judge to read you the law. And I know that you have spent many days at this process, but the law is very important. We talked about it a lot during jury selection, but at the same time, we have an extensive amount of law involved in this case, and we didn't go into great detail. So I do want to go over some of the law that you're going to be considering. When you get the jury charge, it is a very thick document. It has everything that you will need to do your job as a juror. And the jury charge is so specific that it actually says that you are not to consider any of the instructions more important than others. It even tells you how to weigh it. And while I'm not saying that it's anyone's fault, but the way a jury charge is written, a lot of the information is scattered throughout. So when you get the actual jury charge, you're going to be read what the indicted offenses are, and Judge Watkins will begin with count 1. Count 1 is aggravated rape, and he will read out the law of aggravated rape, and immediately following, he will read out the lesser included offenses. Lesser included offenses, as we talked about in jury selection, your verdict has to be unanimous. So you begin with the indicted offense. All 12 of you would have to vote not guilty to move on to a lesser included offense. So when you get the jury charge, he's going to be reading through a lot of different charges, and at the end of that, you get to criminal responsibility, which is what we talked a lot about during jury selection. You also get to credibility of the witnesses, how you weigh the evidence, and you get to any reference to intoxication. All of that, like I said, it's not a step 1, step 2. You kind of have to take the entire thing as a whole. You will get a jury verdict form at the end. And again, you must begin with the indicted offense. The first 5 counts of the indictment are aggravated rape. The next 2 counts are aggravated sexual battery. Mr. Vandenburg is not charged as a principal in any of these counts. He is charged as being criminally responsible. And one thing that we talked a little bit about in jury selection is mental states. In every criminal count, there is a mental state that applies. And I want to talk a little bit about those mental states. Intentionally. This is a legal definition of intentionally. Intentionally means that a person acts intentionally with respect to the nature of the conduct or to a result of the conduct when it is the person's conscious objective or desire to engage in the conduct or cause the result. And I know that you've been listening to attorneys talk on and on and on this week, and it will be no surprise to you that the law, that is not the most simplistic definition. But intentionally, it just means, that's when you just have to break it down and use your common sense. That you have an objective to do something, and you actually do it. I know it sounds complicated, but it's a basic concept that everybody knows. Knowingly. Knowingly is the mental state that applies to criminal responsibility. Knowingly means that a person acts knowingly with respect to the conduct or to circumstances surrounding the conduct when the person is aware of the nature of the conduct or that the circumstances exist. Which actually, I have this broken out because this long definition, it really has kind of two parts to it that you read in conjunction. So it's a person is aware of the nature of the conduct or that the circumstances exist. I would assume that right now all of you are aware of the circumstances that exist. It's just awareness. Again, sounds complicated, but this goes back to common sense. When you have a conscious objective to intentionally do something, that is intentionally. Knowingly is that you have an awareness of your conduct or that circumstances exist. The second part of the legal definition is a person acts knowingly with respect to a result of the person's conduct when the person is aware that the conduct is reasonably certain to cause the result. Again, awareness. You have to be aware. But this is not a high standard. If you don't act intentionally, is a higher level of mental state. That's when you have a conscious objective. Knowingly is awareness. And any determination that you would weigh regarding intoxication would mean that the person was unaware. Unaware. Meaning you don't know where you are, you don't know what you're doing, you don't know what's going on. If you have awareness, under the law, intoxication will not be a defense if you have a knowing mental state. And again, I know that that sounds kind of complicated, but when it comes down to it, it's actually very simple. If you think about it, if intoxication was a defense just because you're intoxicated, then anybody and everybody could go out and do it.
Check your that's improper. Intoxication is a defense to an element here, and Ms. Norman is trying to instruct the jury not to believe in intoxication. She's given an opinion on that, and I'm objecting to that as prosecutorial misconduct.
Well, she's making an argument. That's what she's doing. And that's all it is argument. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Honor. Again, this is a common sense understanding of the common sense that you had when we asked you to come in and be jurors. You don't have to have the detailed legal knowledge, but Judge Watkins is going to give it to you, and you will have that. Is it on?
It's on.
I apologize, I don't want to be tied to this podium. Can you hear me? Can everybody hear me? Again, it's a common sense concept. Intoxication in general life, if you think about, does that make any sense? Does it make sense that you could go out and rob multiple banks and then say, I'm intoxicated, I didn't know what I was doing. Does that make sense to you? Don't forget to use your common sense as you're reading the law. The law is what you use. And again, some of these definitions are a little bit complex in that they're just very wordy. But when it comes down to it, knowing is just having an awareness. Awareness of the circumstances around you, awareness of your conduct. In this case, I want to talk about the awareness of Mr. Vandenburg that led up to this moment. 2:35:15. Up until this moment, you have evidence that came in through the witness stand that Mr. Vandenburg was at the tin roof. Mr. Vandenburg was and he decided to take a cab. He took a cab to her apartments. He attempted to get into her apartment to get her inside. He was aware that something was wrong with her, and she was losing awareness of her surroundings. He attempted to get her in the apartment, could not. He found her car keys. He got in her car. He drove her car back to his dorm, knew exactly where he lived, even though he'd only been there a couple weeks. And he pulls up, he sees people that these aren't even best friends of his. He just knows them from the football team. But he sees them and he goes over to them. And you see him on the surveillance video. He walks over to them and he grabs Jaborian McKenzie's arm. He grabs Jaborian McKenzie and he's directing him. He's bringing him to him. Brings him over. And when he's bringing Mr. McKenzie, Mr. Banks is following, and he's able to walk backwards, and his motioning as he's speaking to them, which we don't know exactly what was said in that moment, but he's able to talk to them, to converse with them. Mr. McKenzie told you that he said that there was a girl in his car that was very intoxicated. He knew that she did not have awareness. He was aware of that. He was aware of his conduct. And he said, I was asking them for help to get her up to my room. Awareness. Knowing exactly what's going on. I submit to you that actually rises to the level of intentional conduct. It is absolutely knowing conduct. And up until this point, however you think she ends up on the floor, if he places her or lays her or drops her, he's able to converse with Mr. Banks, Mr. Batey, Mr. McKenzie. They get upstairs. When they're on the elevator, he leaves the elevator and actually goes into the bathroom. Awareness. Again, I submit to you that's intentional. That's an intentional act. If you watch the surveillance video, you actually see when he walks out of the bathroom, he's zipping up his pants. That's knowing conduct. It's intentional conduct. At this moment here, he thinks body is funny. He thinks that's funny, and he wants to share it with his two friends in California. So he takes out his phone and he takes a video at 2:35:15. At 2:36, again, that timestamp in the middle of the screen, this is California time. At 2:36, he has managed to send send that video via iMessage to California. This is beyond knowing conduct. It is intentional conduct on the part of Mr. Vandenburg. And again, the law only requires the state to prove each element beyond a reasonable doubt. And the mental states, the requirement isn't intentional for every act. Knowing, this is just knowing and awareness and circumstances around you. Mr. Vandenburg is criminally responsible for the conduct of Brandon Banks and Cory Batey for the indicted offenses. Count 1 is aggravated rape. That aggravated rape is an object anal penetration by Mr. Banks. When you read through the law, it is going to be referring to the defendant. We talked about unlawful penetration. We talked about aided and abetted by one or more. We talked about the victim being mentally incapacitated or physically helpless. All of those things are going to be referring to conduct of Mr. Banks and conduct of Mr. Batey, of the actual act. And you have proof well beyond a reasonable doubt of the object penetration in count 1. Mr. Vandenburg is charged with being criminally responsible for that act of Brandon Banks. Again, we talked about this in jury selection, and actually the jury instruction is several paragraphs. This is the crux of criminal responsibility. It actually goes even further than this. And this is when we talked about ands and ors and commas are incredibly important. When you're reading through that paragraph of law, which this is actually 5 paragraphs, you have to pay attention to the ands and ors. This is exactly the way the paragraph is written. The only difference is I've separated it out with bullet points because there are so many ors, and they're very important. If you have the intent to promote or assist, either one, promote the commission of the offense and you direct, solicit, aid, or attempt to aid, that is criminal responsibility. If you have the intent to assist in the commission of the offense and you solicit, direct, aid, or attempt to aid, that is criminal responsibility. If you have the intent to benefit in the proceeds and you direct, solicit, aid, or attempt to aid, that is criminal responsibility. If you have the intent to benefit, and I'm sorry, I think I said benefit in the results, benefit in the proceeds, and you direct, aid, solicit, attempt to aid, that is criminal responsibility. Mr. Vandenburg directed, he aided, he solicited, and he attempted to aid. Those are ands. He did each and every single one, and the law only requires one. You have proof well beyond a reasonable doubt regarding Mr. Vandenburg's criminal responsibility. And again, in reading this law, it's important to look at the specifics. The benefit and the proceeds or results, this doesn't have to be a benefit that you yourself would value in life. Mr. Vandenburg got pictures. Mr. Vandenburg got videos that he shared with several other people. Mr. Vandenburg got enjoyment out of it while it was happening. The enjoyment that he got at that moment, that is him benefiting from his actions. Criminal responsibility, the law says if he wasn't there, you can still be criminally responsible. And we talked about that in jury selection. His presence is not required, and mere encouragement of the principal is sufficient. I want to talk about the law of aggravated rape. Again, we've talked about this. There are 4 elements. The unlawful sexual penetration, aided and abetted by one or more, that the victim is unconscious or physically helpless. And mentally incapacitated, the definition of that includes unconscious. The 4th element is the mental state, intentionally, knowingly, or recklessly. And again, when you're looking at these and you're thinking about the mental state, it's the mental state of Mr. Banks and the mental state of Mr. Batey, that they are the ones that are penetrating the victim. You don't even rise to the level of knowing when you're the principal actor of an aggravated rape. It is just reckless conduct is sufficient. Sexual penetration, the definition, and again, we talked about this a little bit in jury selection. It includes sexual intercourse, fellatio, anal intercourse, or any other intrusion, however slight, of any part of a person's body, or any object into the genital or anal openings of the alleged victims, the defendants, or any other person's body. An emission of semen is not required. Aider and abetter. The law gives you a definition for that. One who advises, counsels, procures, or encourages another to commit a crime. I submit to you that Brandon Banks, Cory Batey, Jaborian McKenzie, and Brandon Vandenburg, all of them encouraged each other. All of them took pictures. Mr. McKenzie, they didn't find any pictures on his phone, and he admitted he took pictures with Mr. Batey's camera. When you look at the pictures on Mr. Batey's phone, there's a picture with his white watch in it that he is taking. And Mr. McKenzie testified that he didn't take all of those images. Mr. Vandenburg, and again, there was an image sequence gap. Mr. Vandenburg, you saw evidence of 3 still photos and 6 video thumbnails. He actually took 6 videos. Only 3 of them were sent to California. And that computer program that didn't wipe Mr. Quinzio's computer, Detective Gish was able to retrieve those videos so that you have 49 seconds of what happened in that room. Mentally incapacitated, the definition is that a person is rendered temporarily incapable of apprising or controlling his or her conduct due to the influence of a narcotic, anesthetic, or other substance administered to that person without his or her consent. It doesn't matter what it was that got you in that state. It's just that you're mentally incapacitated. You have a lack, you're not aware and you can't think. Or that you're physically helpless, that a person is unconscious, asleep, or for any other reason physically or verbally unable to communicate an unwillingness to do an act. And again, I submit to you that you have proof well beyond a reasonable doubt that the victim not only was mentally incapacitated, but she was physically helpless. And again, it's only one. But the evidence, and I submit to you that everything that you've seen is that she was completely unconscious. Every person that testified said that she was unconscious. You heard it from Mr. McKenzie, who is one of the people charged in the case. You heard it from Mr. Prelu. You heard it from Dylan Vanderwall. You heard it from every single person. Even Mr. Vandenburg admits that. Again, count 1, aggravated rape. It's the anal penetration with an object. Mr. Vandenburg is criminally responsible for Mr. Banks's conduct. He directed him. First of all, he's already provided his criminal responsibility because he is the one to do this to her. Mr. Banks, Mr. Batey, Mr. McKenzie, they would have never gotten to her. They weren't with her. I guess they could have gone out and tried to seek her out. But I think it's fair to say that that's not something they would have done. It was Mr. Vandenburg that brought her unconscious. He provided the victim. And then he provided the room. It was, gotta get her up to my room. That video was taken at 2:40 and 50 seconds. They round the corner to his dorm room at 2:38. The second video that you saw of a digital penetration happened at 2:40:10. Within 2 minutes of getting in that room, Mr. Vandenburg is directing someone what to do with a bottle that is in the victim's anus. He is telling him what to do, and he is laughing about it the entire time. He says it not once, not twice, telling him to squeeze it. And then he is aware. He's aware of his circumstances. He's even aware of Mr. Batey's circumstances. Saying, dude, when he goes to mount the victim and penetrate her with his penis, he's like, dude, you're not even hard. That's within 2 minutes. You heard testimony from Mr. McKenzie that everything that happened was happening the entire time they were in there. You heard evidence and saw evidence that Mr. Vandenburg is making phone calls. You saw that message to Mr. Quinzio that he said FaceTime. He's asking people to FaceTime him. And then he makes a call, 1 minute and 11 seconds. Then he gets on the computer. And Mr. Prelude testified that Mr. Vandenburg was over at that corner area of his bed by his laptop. And you have those searches. I think it's 247, 253. This is going on the entire time. Mr. Vandenburg is participating. Mr. McKenzie said that he passed out condoms to them, that he was trying to get an erection. This is 32 minutes. Mr. Vandenburg is directing, aiding, soliciting from the time that they get to Gillette at 2:27, well past the time that Mr. Banks, Mr. McKenzie, and Mr. Batey go up to the 6th floor. I do want to go through the counts, and I'm briefly going to put the pictures up. I am not trying to show you anything more than you have to, but at the same time, this is evidence. It is well beyond a reasonable doubt evidence of each and every count in the indictment. Count 2 is a digital penetration by Mr. Batey. There are multiple photographs in evidence of that digital penetration. Count 3, anal penetration, digital by Mr. Batey. Again, it's Exhibit 38B and C. Count 4, it's aggravated rape. It is fellatio by Mr. Batey. Mr. McKenzie testified about this photograph, and he testified that this was when Mr. Batey was putting his penis in the victim's mouth. And we talked about this a little bit before. The legal definition of fellatio is a sex act accomplished with the male sex organ and the mouth or lips of another. Intrusion into the alleged victim's mouth is not required. And I submit to you that you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt of that count. Count 5, the penile vaginal penetration of Mr. Batey. This is that same 39-second video. It's IMG_1401. This is a still shot from 37 seconds into that video. Mr. Batey, I submit to you, under the legal definition of aggravated rape, that this is evidence in the testimony that you heard beyond a reasonable doubt of a penile vaginal penetration. Mr. McKenzie also testified that after this was the beginning, not the end. That condoms were passed out and that he penetrated her with his penis. The next 2 counts are aggravated sexual battery, and this is actually something that we did not talk about before. There are 4 elements that the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. The second and third elements are the exact same as aggravated rape. Aided and abetted by one or more, that the victim was mentally incapacitated or physically helpless. So in just looking at the first and fourth, the first element is that the defendant had unlawful sexual contact with the alleged victim in which the defendant intentionally touched the alleged victim's intimate parts or the clothing covering the immediate area of the alleged victim's intimate parts. Again, the law defines everything for you. Sexual contact is defined. Intimate parts are defined. Primary genital area, groin, inner thigh, buttock, breast. And then aggravated sexual battery has the element that it has to be done intentionally. And again, this is Mr. Banks and Mr. Batey intentionally committing the act of aggravated sexual battery. Mr. Banks in the primary genital area, Exhibit 37C, that more than meets the legal definition of an aggravated sexual battery. Count 7 is Mr. Batey putting his buttocks on the victim's face. Again, the legal definition of sexual contact of genital area. You have a picture that is proof well beyond a reasonable doubt of that aggravated sexual battery. Count 8 is unlawful photography, and I'm not going to go through the 7 elements the state is required to prove. They will be in the jury instruction. It includes, obviously, photography such as that Mr. Vandenburg did and dissemination, which you have proof beyond a reasonable doubt that he sent those videos out. He even admitted it to the police that he sent those videos out. On June 23rd of 2013, it was 32 minutes. 32 minutes in that room. And during those 32 minutes, you have, these are just from Mr. Vandenburg's phone. From his phone alone, you have 3 still images and 6 videos. And again, it begins at 2:35:15 in the hallway before they get into the room. You can see a progression of the assault. If you take all of the photographs together, you see it even more. Because during this 32 minutes that she is in that room, you see that she has her top on, her skirt on. At the very beginning, which this 10-second video clip was not recovered, but the 7-second video clip that was recovered, you see that the skirt's pulled up, but she still has her underwear on. As you go through the photographs, you see that that changes, that she moves from being on her side and her stomach, that she's in different positions in the room. This photograph on Mr. Vandenburg's phone, Exhibit 36E, while it might look similar to the others, it's actually very different because there is no underwear and her legs are spread wide open. This is as it progresses, as the sexual assault progresses. 36D, she still has her skirt on, and again, she's not in the same position as the other pictures. She's on her back, she's up against that bucket. This photograph, it's again another position. This isn't Mr. Batey mounting her in that video. This is something else. Because this, you can see her arm, her right arm, over here on the left side of the picture. If you look, she has bracelets on one arm and she doesn't on the other, but you can also look at her fingers and tell. So her body is this direction, and this is her head. It goes just on Mr. Vandenburg's phone all the way to the end. Mr. Dylan Vanderwall said that that's what he saw when he got there, was Miss with handprints on her buttocks. Which again, this assault, you see it in all of the photographs, and I'm not going to put up any more. You see everything that happened. And during that time, you have evidence from the phone records that he's making phone calls, calling his friends in California, and he happens to have the awareness and knowing and intent that that's the guy, Mr. Quinzio, that he messaged earlier that night talking about his erectile dysfunction, saying he smashed last night but didn't, he was limp, and that he was gonna F a different girl tonight. Mr. Quinzio said, call me during, and Mr. Vandenburg sends him videos, sends him a message to FaceTime, and they talk on the phone. He sends that same FaceTime message to Mr. Finley, and he tries to call Mr. Finley. He's trying to solicit more people into that room. It is continuous. His actions do not stop. Mr. Prelude told you that he tried to wake him up, and he said, Let's F this bitch. And I submit to you, Mr. Vandenburg, just because his actions make no sense, just because it's something that you may not be able to comprehend, it doesn't mean that it wasn't a knowing act. I submit that most of what he does was an intentional act. He brought her there. He served her up to 3 strangers. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter. It's that he did it. And him finding it funny doesn't have to make sense. It shows that he was aware, that he knew what was going on. And afterwards, his words, he wasn't trying to take her anywhere but out of his room. He wanted her out, wanted her gone, didn't want her in there. And so what does he do? Knowing, intentional acts. He calls his buddies. Chris Boyd tries to call Dylan Vanderwall, gets a group of guys to come over. And that one tiny still frame where his face might look like he's not happy, I submit to you, at that moment, he's not happy that he lost the people to help him get her out of the room. Because he wanted her out of there. He didn't want a safe place for her to sleep. You saw her, you saw how unconscious she was. And after everything that happened to her in that room, he wanted her out, gone. And he continued to do additional acts that the law instructs you are inferences of his guilt when he tried to cover up every piece of evidence of this crime. You see a phone call at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's 4:17, 4:19 to Mr. Cory Batey, a person that Mr. Vandenburg did not know. You see a phone call. You see a message to Mr. Quinzio, Mr. Finley in California. Delete that text. You have surveillance video. You see him going in and out of different rooms at East Hall because he sent the last video to Mr. Boyd and Mr. Austin Carter Samuels. And they're going in the room to delete the videos. But Mr. Vandenburg did not stop there. Because starts off by telling her, "Oh, you're drunk, I had to take care of you. This is so terrible for me." Tells her that he had to take care of her. And then starts being very nice to her. Has her come over to his dorm room. And again, she said he was being so nice and he had made her feel so terrible. And he had consensual sex with her to cover up what happened in that room. And that doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be something that you can't imagine that being possible. That's what Mr. Vandenburg did, and he said he did it. And I submit to you that all of the evidence that the state has presented in this case is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and that there is absolutely no evidence that would support the consideration of intoxication for any of these offenses. And I ask that you return a verdict of guilty on all 8 counts of the indictment.
All right, we're going to take a 10-minute break and then finish the on.
All rise.